Thank you so much, Matthew. I appreciate it, and what a delight it is to be with all of you. I've been looking forward to this. Thank you so much to the organizers of the Good News Conference, and thanks to all of you for being here, for the work that you're doing in your ordinary lives and the inspiration you're going to take from this, such that you can undertake your ordinary lives with greater Catholic zeal and vigor. That's why I'm here too. Special thanks to Bishop Barron, who's been a source of inspiration to me and my family for a long time, somebody I'm privileged to call a friend. How heartwarming it was to see the reaction that he got from all of you as he came up to the stage. People jumped to their feet. For serious Catholics, he's basically our Taylor Swift. I'm here with my wife, Esther. We're both speaking. She'll be speaking this afternoon at 3:30 in one of the breakout sessions about going from resentment to forgiveness. This is the practical application of mercy, if you're interested in that. And it's wonderful that we're able to do some of these things together. More and more, we're traveling together for speaking events, and it really keeps me grounded on the road. As we were leaving the room this morning, she took a look at me up and down, and she said, "You look like a giant grape." So I'm feeling very grounded right now. And of course, you get to hear from many other wonderful speakers, Monsignor Shea yesterday, and Jordan Peterson, who's the most consequential social scientist of our time, somebody for his courage and intellect and creativity has my greatest unalloyed admiration as a fellow behavioral scientist. I'm going to talk today about how we bring mercy to other people in our ordinary work, in our ordinary lives. I'm going to talk about the essence of what it means to be a missionary when you're not knocking on doors. Now, missionary work is hard work. I have had missionaries, literally Christian missionaries on both sides of my family, and I can tell you firsthand that the words no one has ever said in human history are these: "Good news, there's missionaries on the porch. Pretend we're not home." It's tough, and I don't believe that God has actually called me to knock on doors. But he has called me to do mission work, and you too. So my question today for all of us is, how can we do our missionary work in the course of our ordinary life? And by the way, this is no joke. In Luke 10, it's pretty clear that the harvest is plentiful, but the workers are few. Ask the Lord of the harvest, therefore, to send out the workers into the harvest field. If St. Paul had not taken this seriously, it's a good bet that we wouldn't be here today. So are we doing our part? Look, I'm in a completely secular profession, but I want to tell you how I think about it as a scientist. My topic today is how I can be a better missionary, and you can too. And I'm going to offer up 3 simple actions that if we adopt these things in our ordinary lives, will make missionary work better, more fun, and most importantly, more effective. Now, my secular work, as you heard in that really gracious introduction from Matthew, who's the world's funniest MC, my secular work is that I teach at a big university. I teach at a business school. When people ask what you do for a living, which is the icebreaker conversation at most American parties, I say, I teach at the Harvard Business School. They say, oh, do you teach marketing or finance, accounting, supply chain management, something sounding businessy like that? And I say, no, I teach happiness. And they think I'm lying. But it's true. I teach one of the most popular electives at the Harvard Business School. It's called Leadership and Happiness. I have 180 students enrolled. There are 400 on the waiting list, and there's even an illegal Zoom link they think I'm unaware of. Why? Well, the answer is clear. They want to be happier. They want some of the secrets. Now, my class is a science class. This is not a self-improvement class, a feel-good class, a get-to-know-yourself class. No. My class is about the brain and about the behavioral science that lies behind human well-being. And you might ask yourself, why do we need it? Why aren't we happier than we are? And that's really the beginning of what I teach my students in my secular work, is why we're not happier than we are. It starts with a bunch of mistakes that we're all making about happiness. Human beings make a lot of happiness mistakes. Here's the first one. When I ask my students on the first day of class, what is it? You're here to study happiness. You must know what it is. And then I cold call them. It's what we do at Harvard, where you pick students out of the class and you make them answer, right? It makes them intensely unhappy. I'm not going to do that to you. You didn't come to the Good News Conference for that. But one by one, they always say the same thing. They say, happiness, it's how I feel when I'm with the people that I love. Or it's how I feel when I'm doing the things that I enjoy. And I say, that's beautiful, that's lovely, that's wrong. The real good news about the science of happiness is that happiness is not a feeling. Feelings are evidence of happiness. Kind of like the smell of your turkey is evidence of your Thanksgiving dinner. It's not your Thanksgiving dinner. You need to understand what real happiness is, and then you can form a strategy for going to get it, notwithstanding your feelings. That's error number one, and that's what the class is about. Error number two is that when I ask people, what do you want? What do you want? They all say the same thing. I want to be happy. And I say, sorry, not this side of heaven. Happiness on earth is not a destination. It's a direction. Look, you heard from Monsignor Shea yesterday. He reminded us that we have negative emotions for a reason. Negative emotions are produced in a console of tissue deep within the brain that was evolved between 2 and 40 million years ago. It's called the limbic system. The limbic system's job is to translate information that you're ascertaining below your level of consciousness and turning it into a language that you can understand called positive and negative emotions. Positive emotions say there's something to approach because it'll help you survive and pass on your genes. Negative emotions say, avoid that. It's a threat. That's what emotions are. They're nothing more than data. And we need negative emotions. If you didn't have them, you'd be dead in a week. But if you want to be purely happy on this earth, you won't survive. You need them. You should be giving thanks for your negative emotions. They keep you safe. Now, I believe that there is happiness as a destination. I'm a Catholic. And this is one of the great goals that I have in my classes is for people to say, how do I get to that destination, Professor? I'm trying to lead the horse to water and then maybe get him to drink. But the big mistake is thinking that happiness is a destination as opposed to a direction. Getting happier is really the goal. But here's the big mistake that they make, and this is what leads me to my remarks today. Humans are endowed, and the world reinforces a mistaken formula for happiness. There's a formula that the marketing colossus and the economy, and most importantly, that Mother Nature endows us with. Here's the formula for happiness that you sense from your birth and is reinforced over the course of your life. You want to be happier? Do 3 things. Love things and accumulate them. Use people for your pleasure and advantage. And most importantly, worship yourself. That's the formula. Go after all the things that you want. If you accumulate enough stuff, enough prestige, all the worldly rewards, Bishop Barron talks about this a lot, then you'll be happier. Use people. They're there for you. And since they're there for you, you're at the center of everything. Obviously, you're God. Worship yourself. Now, we all know here, this is not exactly a cross-section of the American population here at the Good News Conference. It's weird. Everybody's Catholic. I guess we're done. Right? You know that it promises everything and delivers nothing, that formula. You know where this goes. But I will tell you, not as a Catholic, but as a social scientist, that the formula, love things, use people, worship yourself, what does it get you? Materialism, immorality, narcissism, and misery, cruelty, greed. It leads to ruin. All behavioral scientists know this, but most behavioral scientists don't know what exactly to do about that. We do. See, we have the formula, the real formula, which is weirdly similar to the world's formula. It just takes the nouns and the verbs and it transposes them a little bit. Here's the Catholic formula to the good life. Love people, use things and worship God. We're not afraid of using things. We love the world's abundance, or at least we enjoy it. But the real love that we have in our hearts is dedicated to the other creatures made in God's image, which is people, and we relegate all of our worship to the divine, our Heavenly Father. That is not just sound theology. It's also very sound science as well. I will tell you, I won't go into great detail. That's another speech. But the happiest people are those that have the strongest relationships with others. These are the people who are not chasing money and material things. And these are the people who have a sense of the transcendent, ideally toward the one living God. That's what will make you happiest. So here, this gets me back to my point in my secular work. My job as a missionary is not to go kick somebody's door down and thrust a crucifix into their face. My job is to sneak into people's lives and to substitute the Catholic formula for the world's formula and then sneak out before they know what happened. Yeah. That's a joyful kind of spy work. I'm a Catholic counterintelligence agent. And so are you. So how can we do that better? That's the question. Here's my answer. 3 things. We need, in our Catholicism, to be public, normal, and magnetic. That's what we need to do. We need to be public Catholics, normal people, and magnetic in our faith. So let me tell you a little bit how science says you can do that. Do it better and more easily. And that's going to take us to the theme of mercy. But I'm not there yet. Let's start with being public. We need to be public about our faith. Now, what does that mean? It's actually pretty easy to be private Catholics. No problems, no resistance. We hang out together. We leave it behind when we go to work. People might find out, but it's not a big deal, right? Don't be too public about it. A lot of academics do this. In my profession, it's pretty common that people you'd never know that many of my colleagues are Christian people. You wouldn't know it. They'll kind of sidle up to me in hushed tones and tell me this as if it were something illicit. As if we're meeting in some seedy bar at the edge of town. Or I'll see one in church, and I'll go, weird. And I, on the other hand, am keynoting the Good News Conference, and it's going to be on the internet. But I've been dedicated to this for a long time. My personal dedication is this, as somebody who does intellectual work in the service of the public. I will not give a public pronouncement. I will not give a speech. I will not teach a class where within the first 10 minutes they don't know that my Catholic faith is the most important thing in my life. That's my dedication. That's what I'm going to do. And so people sometimes ask, what's that like, teaching at Harvard with that commitment? I say, imagine being the chief rabbi in Mecca. Keeping your faith to yourself, by the way, that's what the world wants you to do. The world doesn't really care if you're religious. It says, go be a kook. But keep it to yourself, for Pete's sake. Don't bother the rest of the world. See, the world loves people who are privately religious because, they do things like take care of their families and they don't rob liquor stores and things that, society wants. I'm sort of going to assume that about all of you. But then they're not obnoxious about it. They're not too public about it. That's what the world wants. And the result of that desire from the world is that it kind of freaks us out as people. Now, it's very easy for us as Catholics to imagine that something really bad will happen to us if we're publicly Catholic, if we talk about it, if we cross ourselves in public, if we say grace before a meal, all that Catholic stuff. But The truth of the matter is nothing really bad does happen. I can tell you this, having done this job for a long time. Nobody's ever threatened to fire me. Nobody's ever threatened to beat me up. Nobody's ever really even made fun of me. The problem with being a public Catholic isn't the public. The problem is your brain. Let me explain to you a little bit about how the limbic system works to make you not want to be an oddball. Now, we have lots of evolved protective tendencies that are wired into us. One of them is a little piece of tissue in the brain called the dorsal anterior cingulate cortex. Its job is making sure that you don't feel alone, that you feel social pain if you're not one of the group. And there's a reason for this. Homo sapiens are a kin-based, hierarchical, tropical species. That's a fact. That's a biological fact. Now, some of that we can get beyond. For example, we're in Minnesota. A tropical species would do poorly here had we not invented a technology called coats. Hooray for humans. But there's some things we can't get beyond. We're not going to get beyond the social part. We're not going to get beyond the hierarchical, kin-based part of what it means to be a human. And the dorsal anterior cingulate cortex, this little tiny piece of tissue about the size of the end of your index finger, has one big job, making you afraid of being tossed out of your tribe. During the Pleistocene, if you said things that were weird, you didn't quite get along, you probably wouldn't find a mate, and you might just find yourself wandering the frozen tundra and dying alone. That's bad. You have literally onboard hardware to make you afraid of breaking from the pack in any way. If you've ever felt yourself kind of nodding along to group political opinions that you thought were kind of stupid, it wasn't you nodding along, it was your dorsal anterior cingulate cortex. Now, why am I telling you this? Because knowledge is power. Once you know this, that little twinge that you have. And again, this is not a perfect audience to say this to. I should be talking at a conference of secret Catholics, but they don't have conferences. But all of us have this tendency. When something is immoral and you don't speak up, that's the reason you don't speak up, because you've got a little twinge from that part of your brain. But now that you know it, that knowledge is power. See, here's the thing. The part of your brain, the C-suite of your brain that helps you make executive decisions about the way you want to behave, notwithstanding your feelings, that's called the prefrontal cortex. That's the bumper of tissue right behind your forehead. It's 30% of your brain by weight. It's amazing. It's God's gift in making us truly, I believe, in his image. That's the most incredible thing about the human brain. And that's the part of the brain that should be making the decisions, not the limbic system. The most mature people are making decisions in the prefrontal cortex, not in the limbic system. Now that's hard. There's a whole class of people that can't do that. They're completely controlled by their feelings. They're called little kids. And the reason is because they literally don't have the synaptic wiring to make decisions from their prefrontal cortex. The limbic system is in charge. My grandkids, they feel something they don't like, they scream. The truth is that wiring is not complete in women until about the age of 21. And men, it's not complete until 70. But when your prefrontal... all right, simmer down here. It's like... When you know this, you have power. Watch how it works next time you feel that little twinge. You'll say, oh, yeah. Grape guy in Minneapolis told me about that. And the result can be important. It wasn't that long ago. I'm on the road giving talks every week, and it's almost always to secular audiences, groups of professionals. I was giving a talk in Georgia to a group of surgeons, as a matter of fact. And before I gave my speech, I did what I always do. I cross myself and offer my words up to God, saying, guide my words. Put the words in my mouth that these people need to hear. It's my prayer before every time I speak. I'm not thinking about it very much, but I'm a public Catholic. And I got up and I mentioned that I'm Catholic during my speech, as I always do. And after I sat down, a guy comes up to me, a surgeon. I mean, these are tough guys. And he's got tears in his eyes. He said, that really moved me. And I said, thank you. I'm glad you liked my speech. He said, it wasn't a speech. I saw you cross yourself before you went up there. He said, I was raised Catholic. I left a long time ago. I want that. You don't know. You never know. But if you're a public Catholic, be careful. Because if you cross yourself before you do your work better be great. You know, you personally are probably 100% of the serious Catholics that a lot of people are going to meet, at least as far as they know. You know, you have to resist all of the easy things. Bishop Barron talked about the way that we denounce other people, that we blame other people. You can't do that. You can't do that. Remember that gossiping, immorality, drunkenness, if you do that, that means to a lot of people that 100% of Catholics do that. That's bad witness. On the other hand, excellence in your endeavors, that's apostolate. That's how you win people over. We're a mimetic creature. We mimic brilliance. We mimic excellence. And when they see excellence in you, they're going to look for the power. And the power behind it is your faith in Jesus Christ. Let me give you a quote that I like, and I'll bring this part to the close because I have other things to talk about. But being an excellent public Catholic doesn't mean having a fancy job, by the way. It doesn't mean you have to try to get famous. It means making what you do something that's total commitment. God is calling you to serve him in the ordinary, material, secular activities of human life. That's St. Jose Maria Escrivá, the founder of Opus Dei. It's a famous speech he gave in the late 60s called Passionately Loving the World. Look it up. He waits for us every day in the laboratory, in the operating theater, in the army barracks, in the university chair, in the factory, in the workshop, in the fields, in the home, and in all the immense panorama of work. Understand this well. There's something holy, something divine, hidden in the most ordinary situations. Every moment should be Catholic excellence to be a public Christian. Be public. Number 2, be normal. We need to be normal people while we're public, and that's not a small thing. You know, many people make a commitment to be public Catholics. I have a lot of undergraduate students at Harvard University, and they grew up in Catholic families, and they know they need to do missionary work. The trouble is they're weird about it. They make people feel uncomfortable in the way that they do it because their Catholicism feels kind of forced. They'll inject it artificially into conversations. It feels awkward. Now, faith is truly a natural thing. I will tell you this as somebody very interested and involved in the work on evolutionary psychology, that research shows that humans have a deep religious instinct. There's a lot of new work in neuroscience that shows that religious experiences, transcendental experiences, are unavailable to people outside of the realm of religion and spirituality. It's biological in nature. And that's the reason that there are literally no documented societies that are not religious. None. We're working on it. But we're made to worship. What's unnatural is secularism. To shear ourselves off from the divine is the most unnatural thing that any of us can do with our lives, and certainly that we can do to ourselves as a society. And that's the reason that people turn to non-religious things and turn them into religion. Politics becomes a religion. Activism becomes a religion with good and evil and esoteric languages and rituals, and you see it every place around you. You see the sectarian activity that's embedded in the activist causes that we see. But that doesn't get the job done. It doesn't have the ultimate goal. It doesn't have the end that we desire in our hearts. That's why politics and activism, when they come to identity, religious identity, always end up in depression and anxiety. You want to know why we're having an explosion of depression and anxiety among 20-somethings in this country? That's why. They want God. not woke. They want God, not the party. This is not a politically partisan point, because I see it all across the activist and political spectrum, where they're saviors for people, where they want a real savior and they get a counterfeit one. Now, how does something that's natural, like religion, come to feel unnatural? And how does something unnatural, like politics or activism, come to feel natural? That's the real question that I have as a behavioral scientist. And the answer is that the world has done a very good job pathologizing the normal and normalizing the pathological. Really good job. Your faith, it's weird and it's kind of funny and it's strange and it's ridiculous. But you know what's really pretty normal? Shocking, immoral things. We're normalizing them as much as we possibly can. No big deal, cruelty. No big deal, greed. No big deal, death. No big deal. You know what's weird? Going to mass over lunch on a Wednesday. That's apparently weird. So what do we need to do? Just make it normal. Like putting on your shirt. I can give you lots of examples of this, right? Now, to begin with, you have to be in the world. You know, when Pope Francis was in the United States for his One American tour, he was in the United States, he was giving a homily. He said mass for all of the American bishops at the cathedral, St. Matthew's Cathedral in Washington, D.C. And none of us heard it unless Bishop Barron is here. But we heard it later when it was recorded and translated. And he said a very important thing about getting out into the world. He said that the shepherds need to smell like the sheep, right? And he meant the bishops, but he really meant all of us. So you need to smell kind of sheepy, right? You don't need to act like the sheep, just smell like them. Right? But you also, when you're there, you need to let it slip in a natural way. And I've seen it in all sorts of examples in my life. You know, I'll give you one that really kind of moved me, I have to say. You know, when I had a very non-traditional educational experience. I left college at 19. You know, dropped out, kicked out, splitting hairs. And and I went on the road for 10 years as a classical musician. I played in the Barcelona Orchestra. It's where I married my wife Esther, who's from Spain. And my parents called it my gap decade, actually. And when I made it back to college in my late 20s, I had $0 in my checking account, and I had to pay for it myself because, you know, my parents weren't going to put up with that nonsense. I'd blown that long since. So I went to correspondence school. It's all I could afford. So I could work, and I never saw a classroom, and I never met a professor, and I was doing it over, in those days, a fax machine, and it was hard but good, I have to say. And I got the degree a month before my 30th birthday, and then I went to graduate school and got my PhD, and the rest is kind of what's turned out since then. It's been good. But I never really thought about the undergraduate institution until 20 or so years later, when they figured out that one of their guys was, you know, doing okay. So they called me up and asked me if I would be, you know, the graduation speaker at the school that I went to, where I studied by correspondence. And I'm thinking, what is that going to be? Like 8 guys sitting around a conference table? What is the graduation ceremony was going to look like? No. It turns out that it was at the Trenton Ice Pavilion where the hockey team plays, and there was 5,000 cheering families for these people that had built their lives. It was this example of life entrepreneurship. It was beautiful, I have to say. And you know, half of the students were first-generation college students. A third were active military. It's really beautiful. Well, grown-ups, people who had grown up in poverty and not who just screwed up like me. And I have to say there's one moment that really sticks out for me of being a natural Christian. This woman was crossing the stage, and there was hundreds and hundreds and hundreds, and there was no time for them to actually give a little speech each. So they said their name, and they would say one thing. And all of them were saying the same thing. I want to thank my husband, you know, people. I want to thank people who supported me. This one lady, she's about 50 at the time, and she'd lived, man. I mean, lines on her face, and she'd got a nursing degree. And at 50, from this school, on her own, and she said, you know, for this moment, I just want to thank my 5 children and the Son of the living God. Boom. Natural. The most natural thing. Didn't make a big deal out of it. She didn't do like, a football player. I just want to thank the Son of the living God. And she sat down. And I thought, that's my people. That's who I want to be. I want to get caught being a Catholic. Make it natural. Third, maybe most importantly, make it beautiful. Make it magnetic. Make people want it. And, in the current times, that's not the easiest thing to do, quite frankly. Magnetic faith is not something that we see all the time. I don't have to tell any of you that America's in a pretty tricky culture war at this point. I don't like it. You don't like it. But too often we find ourselves participating in it, don't we? Your neurobiology wants you to fight fire with fire. When you're threatened, when you're insulted, another part of your limbic system comes into play. It's called your amygdala. You've all heard of that. It's a bilateral little organ, almond-shaped, and it gives you fight or flight of the negative basic emotions, which are anger, fear, disgust, and sadness. Two of them, anger and fear, are adjudicated by the amygdala. The amygdala is what makes you act and do things that you're later ashamed of ordinarily in social life, saying things that you don't want, returning an insult with an insult. Somebody honks at you in traffic and you say, I shouldn't have flipped that guy off, I'm a Catholic. And we find ourselves participating as Catholics in the fire-on-fire culture wars of our day. And that, my friends, is incredibly dangerous. Not dangerous because you could get beat up, dangerous because you could be spoiling your opportunity for missionary work. Now remember, the missionaries in my family. Here's the weird thing about missionaries. I've known them my whole life. They're always happy. I mean, they're getting doors slammed in their face all day long. They're getting insulted, you weirdo. But they're happy. Why? Because they're bringing truth where there's lies. They're bringing light where there's darkness. What a joy it is to return hate with love. What a privilege it is. But to do that, once again, your prefrontal cortex, your Catholic C-suite, cognitively, has to stand up to your caveman brain. You have to make a decision to return hate with love. It's so dangerous when we're involved in cultural controversies. Can you imagine any worse use of the Catholic faith than using it as a weapon? It's a gift. It's a gift to the world. We know that. And yet, when you're arguing with somebody, how often are you using your Catholic values as a weapon as opposed to as a gift? One practical note about this, nobody has ever in human history been persuaded with insults, ever. I hate you has never gotten the job done. I hate you because my Catholic faith says you're going to hell. Much worse. Much worse. So in this culture war, what should we be doing? What should we be doing instead? Some people say we should be civil. We should be tolerant. I say that's garbage. If I told you that my wife Esther, who's right here, if I said, Esther and I, we have a great marriage, we're civil to each other. I'd say, man, you guys need some Catholic counseling. If I told you that my employees tolerate me, you'd say I have a major human resource crisis on my hands. Civility and tolerance, these are not the high enough standard for Catholic people, for anybody, as a matter of fact. No, the standard is love. The standard is mercy. Love that's not deserved. We heard about it last night from Bishop Barron. Now, of course, it's interesting. I wrote a book in 2019 about the political culture war. And I titled the book, Love Your Enemies. Right? And I give a big book tour, is what we do. I mean, life is book tour for authors, and book tour is life, pretty much. And so I was traveling around all over the place, and I was at a big university, a big state university, and I gave a talk on Love Your Enemies. And afterward, a kid comes up, smart kid, good university, says, I really enjoyed the talk. I mean, I really learned a lot about the brain and about conflict and all that. I really love the title of your book, Love Your Enemies. Where'd you get it? You know? Our education system, I'm telling you. But think about it. But think about it. Do you want to stand up to your limbic system? Matthew 5:44. You have heard that you should love your friends and hate your enemies. But today, I give you a new teaching. My prefrontal cortex gives my limbic system a new teaching. Love your enemies. Pray for those who persecute you. You can make that decision. How do I know? Because I told you happiness isn't a feeling. Love isn't a feeling either. You're long-time word on fire people. You've heard over and over and over again that love isn't a feeling. You've heard again and again the quote from the Summa Theologia that St. Thomas Aquinas defined love as to will the good of the other. He doesn't say anything about feelings. He talks about an act, a commitment, a decision. That's what we can do when we use our whole brain. The most subversive teaching in human history is to love your enemies, to make the decision to do so, to bring love when you're confronted with hate, and maybe even if you're feeling hate. What an incredible thing that is. It's also so intensely practical. Here's the words of a wonderful sermon from November 17th, 1957 at the Dexter Street Baptist Church in Montgomery, Alabama. Dr. Martin Luther King. Love has within it a redemptive power, said Dr. King. And there is a power that eventually transforms individuals. That's why Jesus says, love your enemies. Because if you hate your enemies, you have no way to redeem and to transform your enemies. But if you love your enemies, you will discover that at the very root of love is the power of redemption. This is good spy strategy. Love your enemies. Now how? How? That's the subject of my wife's talk at 3:30. Come to that. All right? But you know, there's lots of ways that social scientists talk about where we can do these hard things. Here's a good way to do it. Remember a time, think back in your own life when you sort of accidentally answered hatred with love, and think about how it made you feel. Then reverse the causation and look for that feeling again, and you will find yourself undertaking the same action. Let me give you an example. When I learned this theory, this is a theory of, it's called the as-if principle. Act the way you want to feel, and that action itself will make you feel that thing again. It's a very strong principle in social psychology. And I can tell you a time when this really worked for me. This is nothing more than a story. It's my story. I want you to find yours. But it's instructive to me. I've been writing books for a long time. The first book I ever wrote as an academic that human beings read was in 2006. You know, I'd written several books before that, but you know, my family didn't read them. I mean, they were just so boring. This book was boring, but for some reason it hit the news cycle in just the right way, and it took off. It was about charitable giving. I wrote it in 2006. It was a long time ago now. And it was a book that asked who gives to charity and who thinks they give to charity. And are they the same group? Spoiler alert, no, right? And a bunch of talk show hosts picked it up because it had some political implications. That was not my intention. And the President of the United States read the book and called me to the White House. And it made big news. So, you know, when the President of the United States reads a book, people say, what's this book? And because they either love or hate the president. In those days, it was President George W. Bush. And I went to the White House to talk about this book. And, you know, George W. Bush, who's kind of, you know, he's a hail fellow, well met. He walks into the Roosevelt room where I'm sitting, and he's reading my bio. He's reading my bio, and it says, French horn player. Like, PhD. He wrote this book. I'm just gonna call you Weird Dude. And every time I see him ever since, you know, he says, there's Weird Dude. I asked him last time I saw him, I said, does that stand up? And he said, look at yourself, look at that suit. Fair point. Anyway, so that book, it takes off, it's in the press, and you know, my life changed. My life changed. Really, it hasn't gone back since then. I started to do a lot of public speaking, I started to do a lot of media, and it was weird at first. Things that seem normal to me now weren't. Among other things, I started to get a lot of correspondence from strangers. I started to hear from people I'd never met, because when people read a book that you wrote, they feel like they know you, And so they talk to you like they know you. Now, my email was completely public, university professor, you get it off the website. And so people would write to me once they'd read the book. A couple of months after the book was out, I was getting tons, like every day. And people would write and say, I really like the book, and here's how I learned about charitable giving. My grandmother was a tither, all this stuff. But when they don't like your book, they realize that they hate you, and they tell you. And it's incredibly disconcerting when you're getting hate mail from strangers for no particular reason. So a month or two after the book came out, it was a Wednesday afternoon, I was in my office. I was teaching at Syracuse in those days. And I was working on my computer, doing some data analysis or something academic. And an email comes ding, it shows up, and I look up and I read it, and it's from a guy in Texas. Dear Professor Brooks, you are a fraud. This is a bad way to start email for your information. Right? But I keep reading because I'm a good sport. I'm reading all my email in these days. And I realize that this guy's email is 5,000 words long. It's gonna take me 20 minutes to read the email. Okay, fine. And I'm reading the email, and it's very insulting. I'm feeling extremely defensive. This guy is refuting every single thing in my book. I mean, finding little tiny what he thinks are errors. I think that the columns in table 3.1 are reversed, you moron. I mean, it was incredibly, incredibly insulting. But I realized 2/3 through the email, 15 minutes in, that I was feeling a lot of gratitude. And I didn't quite know why, and then I thought about it. He read my book. I mean, nobody reads my books. And so I thought to myself, I'm not so virtuous, but I'm never gonna meet this guy. I'm just gonna tell him what I think, what's written on my heart at this moment. So I write back to the guy and says, dear so-and-so, I know you hated the book, and it's all wrong and bad, and I'm bad, I get it, you're very clear, very clear. But that book took me 2 years of my life to write. I put my whole heart into it, and you read every word. I'm really grateful to you for that. Thank you. Send. Yeah. And I didn't think anything about it. I'm never gonna hear from the guy again. Oh no, 15 minutes later, ding. And I'm thinking, I'm apprehensive again. Maybe he wants to kill me now or something. I'm not exactly sure. Dear Professor Brooks, next time you're in Dallas, if you want to get some dinner, give me a call. What? What just happened? What just happened was he came at me with hate. I accidentally answered with love. And in that 15 minutes, my heart was on fire. I felt good about myself. And even if he hadn't answered me, I said, I accidentally did the right thing. And I've wanted that feeling ever since. That's missionary work. That's inadvertent missionary work that we can actually do on purpose. Now, I'll admit, I never had, met that guy in person. I'd probably be chained to a pipe in his basement right now. It might be a little edgy for the Word on Fire conference, but sorry, it's like, that wouldn't be good news. Yeah. But here's the point. Missionary work is all about going out there and finding the contempt, finding the hatred, and looking at it as an opportunity. That's how you make your faith magnetic. Catholic missionaries in ordinary life, they decide how to act notwithstanding their emotions. They return the contempt with love to spread the gospel and love of Jesus Christ, and maybe even save a few souls. Now, I'm gonna sum up. And because I've covered a lot in the last 40 or 45 minutes, I believe that we're all called to be missionaries because I believe that we're all called to sanctify our work. Right? And to sanctify our work means to remember that the main reason we're doing what we're doing is to get to heaven and take as many people with us as we can. Right? Now, that doesn't mean that there's something wrong with us if we're not in a habit or collar here right now. Those are the uniformed military. We're behind the lines. So how do we do it? Remember that the world's formula is mistaken, and we want to find ways to sneak in and share the right formula. That right formula to reinforce what I said before, is to use things, love people, and worship God. That starts with us never using people, us never loving things, us never worshiping ourselves, and to have people observe us loving people, using things, and worshiping our Heavenly Father. You share that faith. How do you do it? You do that by making your faith public, natural, and magnetic. Those three things. Now, some people will say, not you so much, but maybe you occasionally, that your faith isn't strong enough to do that. You wake up some days and your faith isn't strong enough. It's a little tepid maybe. That's exactly when to do these things. Why? Well, let me tell you something about what it means to be a happiness professor. The reason I do this, the reason I do my work, fundamentally, or at least the reason I started doing my work, is because I wanted to be happier. And I understand that the secret to getting happier is understanding the science and changing my habits, but most importantly, it's sharing it with others. You know, there's an old saying in medical schools for people who are becoming surgeons. To become a good surgeon, observe it, do it, teach it. That's the algorithm. And it has a very solid neuroscientific algorithm. The science behind it is unimpeachable. That once you teach something, you'll never forget it. Once you observe yourself doing something, you will become a witness to it to yourself. I'm a happiness teacher because I'm a selfish man and I want to be a happy person. But this is a principle across all of our lives. You're feeling lonely? Go help somebody who's lonely. You don't find love? Go give love. You're not sure that your Catholic faith is strong enough? That's when you need to share it the most. That's when missionary work is the most important of all. Sharing your Catholicism in the spirit of a missionary, well, the faith that grows the most might just be yours. God bless you and thank you.